In 1876, while the Ottoman Empire was collapsing around him, while banks were failing, while the currency was becoming worthless, while other merchants were going bankrupt by the thousands, one man in Constantinople was quietly becoming extraordinarily wealthy. His name has been largely forgotten by history, but his methods have not. He understood something that almost no one else could see, that the same forces destroying everyone around him could be harnessed, redirected, transformed into opportunity. What he did was not magic. It was not luck. It was a systematic approach to crisis that has been repeated by the wealthy in every collapse since. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what he did, step by step, decision by decision. Because the Ottoman collapse of 1875 to 1900 was not unique. It was a pattern. The same pattern that played out in Weimar Germany. The same pattern we saw in Argentina. The same pattern that some say is beginning right now. The strategies that built fortunes during the Ottoman crisis are still valid today, still being used by those who understand them. Stay with me, and you'll see the collapse through his eyes, and learn what most people never understand about how wealth is really built when empires fall. Before we can understand how wealth was built during the Ottoman collapse, we must understand what was collapsing and why. The Ottoman Empire in 1875 was a vast but deeply troubled state, stretching from the Balkans through Anatolia, down through the Levant and across North Africa. It had been one of the most powerful empires in world history, but by the second half of the 19th century, it was dying. The death was financial as much as political. For decades, Ottoman sultans had been borrowing from European banks to finance wars, to build railways, to construct palaces, to maintain an army and bureaucracy far larger than the economy could support. Each loan led to another. Each repayment required new borrowing. The debt spiral accelerated year after year, decade after decade. By 1875, the empire owed approximately £200 million to foreign creditors, an almost incomprehensible sum for the time, equivalent to perhaps $200 billion today when adjusted for the size of the global economy. The annual interest payments alone consumed more than half of all government revenue. And then came the crisis. The harvest of 1873 had been poor. The harvest of 1874 was worse. Agricultural regions that normally produced surplus for export were barely feeding themselves. Tax revenues collapsed. The government scrambled to find money to make its debt payments, but there was no money to find. In October of 1875, the Ottoman government announced that it would pay only half of the interest due on its bonds for the next 5 years. In essence, it was a partial default, an admission that the empire could not meet its obligations. The effect was catastrophic. European investors who had purchased Ottoman bonds, and there were many, attracted by the high interest rates, saw their investments lose half their value overnight. Banks that had lent heavily to the Ottoman government faced their own crises. Credit throughout the empire evaporated. This was the environment in which our merchant, let us call him Demetrius, for he was Greek, though he operated from Constantinople, began to build his fortune. Demetrius had arrived in Constantinople as a young man, apprenticed to an uncle who traded in textiles. He had spent 20 years learning the trade, building relationships, studying how money moved through the empire. By 1875, he was a modestly successful merchant, comfortable but not wealthy, respected but not powerful. What made Demetrius different was not his capital. It was his understanding. He had watched the Ottoman debt grow for years. He had seen the tax collectors become more desperate, the bribes become larger, the currency become less stable. He had talked with the Jewish bankers who handled much of the empire's internal finance, with the Armenian merchants who dominated the long-distance trade, with the Greek shipowners who moved goods across the Mediterranean. And he had concluded, years before the crisis broke, that a reckoning was coming. Most merchants who saw trouble coming simply tried to protect themselves. They hoarded gold. They reduced their exposure. They waited for the storm to pass. Demetrius did something different. He prepared not just to survive the crisis, but to exploit it. His first move, in the years before the default, was to systematically convert his assets into forms that would hold value through currency chaos. Ottoman paper money, known as kame, had been losing value steadily as the government printed more and more to cover its deficits. Demetrius took every paper pound he received and converted it as quickly as possible into gold, into silver, into goods that had intrinsic value. When others complained about the inconvenience of carrying heavy coins, Demetrius smiled and paid the premium for precious metal. He also began to accumulate goods that he knew would be needed regardless of what happened to the government. Textiles, yes, but also grain, leather, tools, medicine. He stored these goods in warehouses outside the city, diversified across multiple locations, insured against fire and theft with Lloyd's of London rather than Ottoman insurers. He was building an inventory that would appreciate in real terms as the currency collapsed. When the default came in 1875, Demetrius was ready. The immediate effect of the default was chaos. The Ottoman lira, which had been trading at approximately 90 kurush to the British pound, began to fall. Within months, it took 110 kurush to buy a pound. Within a year, it took 150. Those who held their wealth in paper Ottoman currency watched it evaporate. But Demetrius held gold and goods, not paper. As the currency fell, his real wealth increased. The grain he had purchased for 100 liras was now worth 200 liras, not because grain had become more valuable, but because the lira had become worthless. His second move was more aggressive. As the crisis deepened, desperate merchants began to sell their inventories at any price they could get. They needed cash to pay debts, to cover losses, to survive another month. Demetrius was waiting with his gold. He purchased goods at 20, 30, sometimes 50% below what they had cost just months before. He bought warehouses from merchants who could no longer afford the rent. He bought contracts from traders who needed immediate cash more than future profits. He was not predatory in a personal sense, he paid fair prices given the circumstances, he did not cheat or deceive, but he was absolutely ruthless in taking advantage of the opportunities that panic created. The crucial insight, the thing that made Demetrius wealthy rather than merely comfortable, was understanding the difference between price and value. In a crisis, prices collapse because everyone needs to sell at once. But value, the underlying utility of goods, the productive capacity of assets, the fundamentals that determine what something is really worth, value changes much more slowly. A warehouse full of grain is worth the same amount of nutrition whether the currency is strong or weak. A factory that can produce textiles is worth the same productive capacity regardless of what is happening in the banking system. A ship that can carry cargo is worth the same transportation ability whether the government is stable or in default. When prices collapse below value, that is opportunity. And the Ottoman crisis created opportunity on a scale that few people in Constantinople could even comprehend. But Demetrius did not merely accumulate. He also understood that crisis creates new patterns of demand, new channels of commerce, new ways of doing business that did not exist before. As the Ottoman government struggled, European powers began to take more direct control of Ottoman economic life. The Public Debt Administration, established in 1881, gave European creditors direct control over significant portions of Ottoman tax revenue. This was humiliating for Ottoman sovereignty, but for a merchant who understood what was happening, it created opportunity. The Europeans brought with them European standards, European procedures, European connections. Demetrius positioned himself as a bridge between the old Ottoman commercial world and the new European-dominated system. He learned French, which was becoming the language of business in Constantinople. He adopted European accounting practices. He built relationships with the European merchants and bankers who were flooding into the city to take advantage of the empire's distress. This was not betrayal of his adopted home. It was adaptation. The old Ottoman commercial system was dying whether anyone liked it or not. Those who clung to the old ways would die with it. Those who adapted would survive and prosper. By 1885, Demetrius was one of the wealthiest merchants in Constantinople. He owned warehouses, ships, trading contracts across the eastern Mediterranean. He had interests in textiles, grain, tobacco, and the new petroleum products that were beginning to transform transportation and industry. But his greatest period of wealth accumulation was still ahead. In 1894, another crisis struck. A series of earthquakes devastated Constantinople, killing thousands and destroying property across the city. The following years brought massacres of Armenians, political instability, and renewed financial chaos. Each crisis drove away the timid, destroyed the unprepared, and concentrated wealth in the hands of those who could navigate the chaos. Demetrius had learned from 1875. He had kept his reserves high, his debts low, his assets diversified. When the 1890s brought new catastrophe, he was ready once again. The specific tactics he employed during this second wave of crisis were even more sophisticated than before. He had learned that in times of extreme uncertainty, liquidity was king. Not just gold, but the ability to convert assets to cash quickly, to move money across borders, to access credit when others could not. He established relationships with banks in London, Paris, and Vienna, banks that would extend him credit when Ottoman institutions could not be trusted. He created legal structures that protected his assets from Ottoman government seizure. He moved portions of his wealth to Switzerland, not because he planned to leave, but because wealth that cannot be seized is wealth that is truly secure. He also learned the power of reputation. In times of crisis, when contracts cannot be enforced by courts, when governments may or may not honor their obligations, when banks may or may not open their doors tomorrow, reputation becomes the ultimate collateral. Demetrius made a point of honoring every commitment he made, even when it would have been profitable to default. He became known as a man whose word was absolutely reliable, whose handshake was better than any legal document. This reputation became invaluable. When others could not get credit, Demetrius could. When others could not find partners for ventures, Demetrius could. When others could not purchase inventory because suppliers did not trust them to pay, Demetrius could. His reputation was a competitive advantage that no amount of money could have purchased directly, but which converted into money again and again. By 1900, when the Ottoman Empire was lurching toward the final crises that would eventually destroy it, Demetrius had built a fortune that would survive not just him but his grandchildren. His descendants would be prominent in Greek and international commerce for generations. The foundations of their wealth were laid during the terrible years between 1875 and 1900, when the empire was collapsing and most people were trying merely to survive. What can we learn from Demetrius? What principles can we extract from his example? The first lesson is preparation. Demetrius did not wait until the crisis struck to prepare. He saw the warning signs years in advance and positioned himself accordingly. He converted vulnerable assets to resilient ones. He built reserves. He reduced debts. He diversified across different types of assets and different geographic locations. Most people wait until crisis is obvious before they act, and by then it is too late. The time to buy gold is not when everyone wants gold. The time to reduce debt is not when credit has already tightened. The time to build reserves is not when everyone is desperate for cash. Preparation must come before the crisis, which means acting on analysis rather than reacting to events. The second lesson is the difference between price and value. In normal times, price and value are closely aligned. But crisis breaks that alignment. Prices collapse because everyone must sell at once, but value collapses much more slowly if at all. The merchant who can distinguish between price and value, who can identify assets that are cheap because of panic rather than because of genuine deterioration, can acquire wealth at extraordinary discounts. This requires both capital and courage. You need capital to buy when others are selling, and you need courage to act when everyone around you is convinced that the world is ending. Demetrius had both. He had accumulated capital through years of careful management, and he had the psychological strength to act on his analysis even when it contradicted the prevailing mood. The third lesson is adaptation. Demetrius did not try to preserve the old Ottoman commercial system. He recognized that it was dying and positioned himself for the new system that would replace it. He learned new languages, adopted new practices, built new relationships. He was not sentimental about the past. He was focused on what was coming. This is difficult for many people. We become attached to the systems we know, the relationships we have built, the ways of doing things that have worked in the past. But crisis destroys old systems and creates new ones. Those who cling to the old ways may find themselves perfectly adapted to a world that no longer exists. The fourth lesson is reputation. In stable times, institutions enforce contracts, courts adjudicate disputes, laws create predictable frameworks for business. In crisis, all of this breaks down. What remains is reputation, the personal knowledge that others have of your reliability, your honesty, your commitment to your word. Demetrius cultivated his reputation as carefully as he cultivated his financial capital. He understood that reputation was capital of a different kind, harder to accumulate and easier to lose than money, but invaluable when the institutions that normally substitute for reputation cease to function. The fifth lesson is liquidity. In normal times, it makes sense to have your wealth invested in productive assets rather than sitting idle as cash. But crisis demands liquidity. Opportunities appear suddenly and disappear just as quickly. Emergencies arise that require immediate cash. Those who lack liquidity may be forced to sell valuable assets at the worst possible moment, while those with liquidity can purchase those same assets at enormous discounts. Demetrius maintained liquidity even when it meant sacrificing returns. He kept cash reserves, maintained credit lines, ensured that he could access significant capital on short notice. This liquidity cost him some returns during normal times, but it more than paid for itself when crisis came. The sixth lesson is diversification. Demetrius did not keep all his wealth in one place, one form, or one jurisdiction. He spread his assets across different types of goods, different geographic locations, different legal structures. When any one element was threatened, his overall wealth remained secure. This diversification extended beyond mere financial assets. He diversified his skills, learning new languages and new business practices. He diversified his relationships, building connections with Greeks, Armenians, Jews, Turks, and Europeans. He diversified his presence, establishing operations in multiple cities. This made him resilient against any specific threat while remaining ready to take advantage of any specific opportunity. There is one more lesson, perhaps the most important of all. Demetrius was not predatory. He did not create the crisis. He did not exploit the vulnerable in ways that left them worse off than necessary. He drove hard bargains, yes, but he paid fair prices given the circumstances. He honored his commitments. He built relationships that survived the crisis and continued to benefit both parties for decades afterward. This matters because crisis is temporary. The relationships, the reputation, the practices that you establish during crisis will persist long after the crisis has passed. Those who exploit others ruthlessly during hard times will find themselves isolated when times improve. Those who deal fairly, even while taking advantage of opportunities, will find their networks and reputation carrying them forward into the post-crisis world. The Ottoman collapse of 1875 to 1900 is not merely a historical curiosity. The patterns that played out during those decades have repeated throughout history and continue to play out today. When Russia collapsed in the 1990s, a handful of oligarchs accumulated fortunes using methods remarkably similar to those of Demetrius. They converted assets to hard currency, they acquired valuable enterprises for fractions of their real value, they built relationships with international capital, they adapted to the new system rather than clinging to the old. When Argentina went through its repeated financial crises, the same patterns appeared. Those who held pesos lost everything. Those who held dollars or real estate or productive assets preserved their wealth and often increased it. When Zimbabwe's currency collapsed, when Venezuela's economy imploded, when Greece went through its recent crisis, in every case, the same patterns emerged. The prepared prospered while the unprepared suffered. The liquid could buy while the illiquid were forced to sell. The adaptable survived while the rigid perished. And today, many observers see warning signs similar to those that preceded the Ottoman collapse. Debt levels that cannot be sustained. Currencies that are being debased. Institutions that are losing credibility. Political systems under stress. Whether these warnings will prove accurate, whether we are approaching a crisis comparable to what Demetrius navigated, is impossible to know with certainty. But the principles that served him well are timeless. Preparation, understanding the difference between price and value, adaptation, reputation, liquidity, diversification, these principles serve well in good times and become absolutely essential in bad times. The story of Demetrius is not famous because he was not a political figure, not a general, not a sultan. He was merely a merchant who saw clearly, prepared carefully, and acted decisively while everyone around him was paralyzed by fear or driven to ruin by poor decisions. But the fortune he built outlasted the empire that collapsed around him. His grandchildren were wealthy. His great-grandchildren were comfortable. The decisions he made during those terrible years between 1875 and 1900 echoed forward through generations. This is the power of understanding how wealth is really built during crisis. Not through luck, not through inheritance, not through exploitation, but through clear analysis, careful preparation, and courageous action when others are frozen with fear. The Ottoman Empire is gone. Demetrius is gone. But the patterns remain. The principles remain. And the opportunities, for those who understand them, remain. If this story has given you new ways to think about crisis and opportunity, about preparation and adaptation, about the timeless principles of wealth preservation and accumulation, I would value your thoughts. What parallels do you see to our current moment? What preparations are you considering? What lessons from history seem most relevant to you? These conversations enrich everyone who participates in them, and your perspective might illuminate something that others have missed. If these explorations of history and finance resonate with you, consider being part of the ongoing conversation as we continue to investigate how the past can illuminate our present and future.